Welcome, everyone. I'm Shay Witzberger. I'm one of the two facilitators of the Community Safety Review.
The reviews and articles I had read before.
Try to keep yourself muted if you can. I use she, her, they, them pronouns. And just in terms of how we're going to be running the space, we'll tell you a little bit more about what we have been working on and how you can participate in a moment. But we're not going to be using the chat for formal open parts of conversation, except where it's an accessibility tool, which is fine. We are going to be using the chat if you can't figure out how to use your raise hand function, or you can't figure out how to speak. That's a totally fine use of the chat. And if you can't speak out loud for some reason, we can use the chat. We're going to attempt to use raise hand function to keep the conversation flowing. So if you can find your little blue hand raiser, that is going to be a way that we can do that. If you can't figure out how to do that, naming that you'd like to speak in the chat is going to be totally fine. And we're going to read out a lot of what we see in the chat if it's relevant, in order to make sure that everybody can see that we have one conversation happening at a time. Are there other Zoom administration things we need to cover, Emily?
I'll just offer, I'm Emily Megas Russell. I use she, her pronouns. I am also with Shay, a co-facilitator of the Community Safety Review Project, and with the committee as well. And I'll just say that in order to find the blue raise hand function, you'll want to have your participants screen up. So if you hover over the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says participants, and then you'll have access to some icons. One is a blue raise hand. And as Shay has mentioned, we have had a lot of success in this meeting of keeping the chat enabled. We really don't want to silence the chat. And we've had a lot of success using it for accessibility needs. Like if you're somebody who needs in this moment, who would like for something to be read for you, you can put that in the chat and we're happy to read that for you. The downside to the chat is that not everybody can see it because folks on the phone aren't able to read the chat. So that's why we read it out loud when we can. Yeah, and I'm just so grateful for y'all joining us.
This is a public warned town committee meeting, though it's also a public forum, and it is being recorded. Mm-hmm. So in addition to it being public and open to whomever wants to join, it's also being recorded and will be shared probably. So just so you have informed consent about how you want to share. After having said that, I think I'm going to pass it over to Lana to introduce you all to a little bit about what we've been up to and what we are here to do.
Welcome, everyone. I have to say I got a little shiver when I saw that there are so many people in this room, and I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. So what we are is a grassroots project and facilitated committee of the Brattleboro Select Board. We welcome you to this public opportunity to share experiences with policing, DCF, mental health interventions, and the other ways that systems attempt to support safety in our community. We will use your feedback to make recommendations about budget, policy, and next steps to the Brattleboro Select Board. Your experiences and feelings about safety, danger, harm, and community safety systems in Brattleboro are essential to this process. We want to invite those most impacted to be at the center of this project. That means that people with direct experience of these systems are welcome to share, and that folks from marginalized communities that experience increased system interaction are especially welcome to share. This includes members of our community who are BIPOC, LGBTQ+, survivors, sex workers, undocumented people, folks who have been arrested or incarcerated, and people who've experienced homelessness, drug use or substance use disorder, poverty, psychiatric labeling or disability, and many more. This forum is public. It's an opportunity to share, but it is simply one of the many ways that you can make your voice heard. We have other forums that will remain confidential and de-identified, that we will share about at the end for anyone who is interested. And I am so excited to get started and to hear your stories and to share this community space with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. So I think next is me briefly. We have been starting our committee meetings with a momentary sort of grounding practice. So I'd like to invite us into that. If you would like to, you're welcome to turn your camera screen off. And as I always say about these practices, it's totally up to you what you do or do not do. Nothing is on any level required. And I will share for the many folks joining us that it was a direct request from many people that we worked with organizing towards this project, and to include some somatic and sort of attunement practices, safety attunement practices, considering that what we're doing here is talking about experiences of danger and harm and moments of unsafety. And so just wanting to really honor that that's part of our conversation here and give us an opportunity to ground into our bodies. So if you would like to, you're welcome to take a moment to settle into a chair or wherever you are, if you're standing, to make yourself a little bit more comfortable, if that's possible. If not, that's okay. And go ahead and keep your eyes open for a moment if you'd like, and you can just go ahead and look around you. Look around the room, notice where you are. And see if you can notice the room around you and your breath at the same time. Make sure to look all the way around you, behind you too, see what's around you in your space, wherever you are. And then bring your attention back to the screen with the eyes open, just noticing that we're here together in this virtual space. Acknowledging that and letting your body adjust in this moment to being here together in this way, in this new way. And see if you can find something either in your body or in your environment that can kind of be a resource or an anchor for you. Something that can remind you of your supports, your resources, internal, external, around, even in those moments when they're really hard to remember. And just take another breath or two, noticing something inside the body, a part of the body, or something outside the body, something in the room around you that you can look at or come back to, just to reset, to ground back in your experience. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes if they're closed and take your time to come back to the group space. And I'm going to take this moment to say that during this meeting, I will be available for emotional support. So if you feel like you'd like to talk to somebody, not in a public meeting, you can chat me, Emily MR, directly, and I'll give you my phone number and we can find a time to chat now or after this meeting or another time.
Thanks for that, Emily. So I think we're going to move on to agreements, and then we'll move on to the bulk of the meeting, which is sharing. And this is also something we are doing at the beginning of every meeting and something we're asking you all to participate in. These are agreements that our committee has made with one another about how we're going to be in space together. And Laura's gonna share them with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Emily, for the grounding part. I really always appreciate starting with that. So I'm going to read these agreements, and our hope is that everybody here is going to be able to follow these agreements, just acknowledging that this is really hard work for us to do. And we've been reading the agreements at the start of every meeting just to keep them alive and in our minds. It's about, it's a little bit more than half a page. Be curious. Acknowledge that we come from different places and different life experiences. Center anti-racism as foundational in this process. Center anti-oppression, including work to avoid and end racism, sexism, transphobia, and homophobia, ableism, saneism, and all forms of oppression. Sanist oppression can look like pathologizing language, outing people's psychiatric labels, or engaging with people discriminatorily due to their psychiatric labeling or disability. Be kind whenever possible and use respectful language always. Use both and thinking instead of either or thinking whenever possible. Use whoa, ouch, oops to pause. Acknowledge hurt and take responsibility. Acknowledge or apologize when we hurt each other, even if we didn't intend harm. Hold space for probable good intentions while acknowledging that intention and impact both do matter. Welcome feedback and accountability from one another enthusiastically and give it generously. Hold a larger vision of a big intergenerational world-changing work and honor realistically the short time frame and limited scope of this one effort inside of that long arc. Acknowledge the contradictions. Be generous and reverent of people's lived experiences, especially stigmatized experiences like incarceration, arrest, poverty, homelessness, abuse, and addiction. Check our biases individually and together. Work to attune to safety, value the quality of our human experience together, and aim to make things safer, while acknowledging that safety looks different for each person and is never guaranteed. Make change in our community through both the process and the production of outcomes. That's it.
Thank you, Laura. And I just want to add that we did add another agreement our last meeting. I put the agreements in the chat for folks to be able to read. And the last one, which wasn't on the original list, so that's why you didn't get it. Sorry, Laura, is to hold responsibility of confidentiality with reverence and respect informed consent in how information shared is used. Thank you.
So this is a very public space. Most of the ways that we're going to be continuing people's stories and information are going to be a lot more private than this one. But this space is public. So we wanted to check in with you all if you felt like you could make those agreements with us in this huge room and hold what we're hearing from folks with that kind of really reverent, respectful intention. So I don't know if you want to give me a little digital thumbs up if you're in the space and you feel like you can hold that intention with us here, and hopefully that can build trust in the rest of us to be able to actually share what we came here to share. Thank you for doing that. Like 50% thumbs up, I would say. It's okay. Finding your digital thumb is hard, firstly. You could turn your video on and use a real thumb if you want. You don't have to do it, but we are spending a lot of time in this process on trust because that's part of what safety means, is building trust and holding trust and being trustworthy. So I'm grateful for you all doing that work with us. We're gonna open up some sharing space. Annaliese, you wanna take it away?
Hello, I'm Annaliese Griffin. I use she, her pronouns. And to reiterate what Lana said, I'm so thrilled and grateful to see so many people here tonight. This is an amazing turnout. So we went over our agreements, and this is sort of a more logistical overview to welcome you into this space. Everyone gets about 5 minutes to speak, and we have lots of people here, so we really want to make sure that we can hear as many of you as possible tonight. If there is not time for everyone, there are lots of other ways to share. We have a survey. There is another one of these on Saturday, 5 to 8 p.m. It will be a little fancier. So there's going to be some music and some art involved. Maybe I piqued your interest. Please use your blue hand. I didn't know where it was either before I started this process. So if you need to clarify that, please do that in the chat. Use your blue hand. We're making a queue. We can call on you in an orderly way. This is a very public space. Please speak as frankly as you feel comfortable about your own experience, but don't name other folks whose consent you don't explicitly have to do so. And some of these experiences we're going to hear this evening will likely be difficult to hear. If you have one that you would hesitate to tell in front of a young person in your own life, please give us a little warning, because there might be folks who have young people in the room with them, or if you want to give us a warning of any kind about content that you might find you think other people will find difficult. Please keep muted when you're not speaking so that we are paying attention to people who are sharing their experiences and not background noise. And most of all, we are so grateful to have you here. This is difficult emotional work to do that we're all trying to do together. And one of the things in this committee that we found is it's been amazing to be in a community willing to do it. And we just are so grateful for it. So thank you. And let's get started.
My name is Maya. I'm also a committee member. I'm going to be holding the queue, so feel free to now raise your hand or write in the chat, and I'll write your name down, and then I'll announce who's going to speak next.
And again, we're welcoming folks, especially folks who have been directly impacted by community safety systems, but anyone, to share your own experiences of any kind of thing related to safety and danger and harm, and also to share your visions for what a safer community for everyone looks like. And we want to really give that space to center the people who have had direct impact by these in this world, by these systems, and also for everyone to share, what does a safer community look like? What would a totally safe Brattleboro look like? Can we go there? It's been interesting for me to hold so many of these conversations and have that specific conversation with so many people. So I hope that you can get brave, people, and share with us, because the committee talks to it ourselves a lot, and we are here to listen to you.
And I just want to say a thank you to Christine and Janet, our ASL interpreters, for joining us today.
If I may, I'd love to encourage any people of color in the room, people who are directly affected by carceral violence for any of the reasons we've mentioned or not, to step forward first or not.
At the moment, we have Kaz DeWolf, and then I will be still watching for anyone who wants to share next.
All right. Thanks for letting me share. I just wanted to speak a little bit about my experiences as a psychiatrically disabled person. who has been in crisis multiple times, and I've been hospitalized here in Brattleboro twice. I think that's true, twice. And I've, when in crisis, I've made use of support lines, suicide hotline, and when those folks determined that that I needed emergency intervention, the people who showed up at my door were police. This has happened 4 or 5 times, and not once has there been a support worker, crisis worker, social worker of any sort. It's who arrives. It's each time it's been police who are really not at all trained or equipped to be supportive to me and any of the people when we're in crisis. I worked for Vermont Psychiatric Survivors for 3 years, and in our research and our research we used in our advocacy, we found a study by the Ruderman Foundation that 50% of police shootings in a time period sampled, which was through newspaper articles, because there wasn't actually like a data collection. This is not just in Brattleboro, this is nationally. 50% of police shootings were of disabled people with psychiatric labels being the bulk of those, the majority of those. And there have here in Vermont been police shootings of people in crisis. I don't have any like direct experience of physical violence other than being detained against my will and taken to an ER, held there for days, like here at Brattleboro Memorial Hospital, held here for days against my will, and being at the Brattleboro retreat against my will also, being I guess that's I have stories there that would like require content warnings for sexual assault, I guess. Is that something I can talk briefly about here? This is woven into the system in order like there's the LGBT unit here, which is, you know, something that a lot of us really need is some like intensive support in a crisis. And it really is terrible that the only space to do that for us is a locked unit that requires being strip searched upon entry. I'm transgender, and the first time that I was strip searched at the retreat, there's supposed to be 2 people in the room to prevent sexual assault from happening. There was only 1 person in the room. And I felt really scared. I knew I worked in advocacy and I knew the policy, and I knew that wasn't happening. And like it was a standard strip search, but like that's still like having to remove your clothes without consent is like still violence, and it's systemic, and it's throughout the whole system as it's practiced here in Brattleboro is violence against disabled people. So that's what I wanted to talk about tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Kaz, for sharing, and thank you for being here.
I forgot to share before. Thank you, Kaz, so much. We're not going to be responding to folks in like advice giving or any kind of other type of way, just to make sure that folks aren't like, you know, we can thank folks. Anybody is welcome to thank folks. But I'm really grateful that you shared that, Kaz, that important info about how this works in our community.
I also just want to note that I am going to be keeping time. And so if you get to 4 minutes out of 5, I will, as politely as possible, interject and say, you have 1 more minute, just to let you know.
And if the stack gets a lot deeper, we'll have to be a little more strict about the timekeeping. And as the stack is incredibly light right now, we can be a little more flexible. So do we want to move on? The next person with their hand up is Rebecca. Rebecca, you want to share?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hi there, everyone. I'm Rebecca. I'm the director for the Vermont Advocacy Services, and I work all over the state of Vermont. I do live in Vernon, which is very close to Brattleboro. So as a deaf person, we have a lot of struggles in Brattleboro, especially now with COVID. Things are pretty isolated. Our sources are limited now. My husband is a person of color, and he lives in fear. We all live in fear about what's going on in Brattleboro. Now, especially wearing the masks, it's hard for communication access for us. And we are struggling, and we're struggling how to figure out how the community can make it accessible for deaf people and people in general. Deaf people plus deaf people with other issues. We do live in fear because we are not able to communicate with everybody or with anybody, especially with the masks these days. And if we are to encounter police, you know, we are fearful of that because of what's going on in our country now. And so I just came here to watch and to see what people had to say. And you talk about disability and deaf people, we are of that community. And so I want to know how we can make it better, because for me, it's a daily struggle, you know, stepping into the community. I did grow up here. I'm from Brattleboro area, and still I feel really unease, you know, because of what's going on with the police and because of, you know, connections being gone and what's going on with that. So I did want to just share that, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Rebecca. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I think sometimes we forget that Brattleboro has a very thriving deaf community as well, especially with the history of the Austin School. Thank you for sharing.
And Gary, you're next. Gary, if you'd like to share, you're up next.
Oh, okay. I didn't know I had to unmute myself. I'm sorry.
Welcome, Gary.
Hi, how you doing, guys? I guess my biggest thing, I've had issues like, you know, I always like to ask my daughter how her day at school was. And sometimes it's hard for her to converse or communicate the issues that are going on even in the schools with racism. Kids, as we know, can be cruel at times, even when I grew up back in the 70s, not revealing my true age, going to Catholic school, dealing with that. And when you have a child that's multiracial and you're dealing with issues that are going on out there in the world, having resources and people that they can go to in the school, not just home. She has it hard enough. She's on the honor roll, but being hard enough, going to school, dealing with that. It took a while for her to open up and tell me issues that were said to her and being done to her with other kids on the bus. I wasn't too thrilled, and I just followed the proper channels with that. My feelings on that at the time were just, you know, disgust, deplorable, just, you know, wow, we're still going through this after what we've been going through. My feelings were just, you know, out there, you know, and my thoughts were just erratic, you know, thinking we've come so far, we thought we were at the point where we need to be, but I guess we're not. And that's something the kids should not have to experience. There's enough pressure and stress going on with them. No child should have to carry that at an age in school and then growing up, because the first thing they're going to think, this is what life is all about. Hatred, name calling, and these things, they're not, you know, something that we adults need to not, you know, neglect, we need to address immediately. And I believe we need more root justice systems and things like that in the schools. dealing with this day to day. I mean, you can't control what a child's going to say because whatever they're taught or learned, they're going to pick up, they're just going to do. But when it affects a child, it kills their spirit, you know, and the first thought they're going to think is that, you know, we have enough going on, but we as adults should be able to go to our child and say, hey, look, you know, the world's not like that. I'm not going to pretend it's Disneyland. I'm not going to say sugarcoat it, but this is what it is and this is what we need to do. But easier said than done. But, you know, she's got 2 years left and then college, but it's like, I can see it's a struggle for her because I went to school by myself, and it's not like you can call up your parent while you're sitting in a class where another child is racially discriminating against you, and you go to a teacher and you're still not getting results. So I'm just going to take it to that next level. It's not just we as adults experience that, and even with police, but just in general, in businesses and in places like that. So even in the hospitals or wherever you're working at, it's just something that needs to be tackled immediately and addressed because it's just not acceptable to me personally. I will condole it, nor I, fantasize it doesn't exist, but this is just something that's just out there, and that just that, but her being handicapped as well with ADHD. So there's a lot of limitations with her, and she's doing her best, but to kill her spirit, and you have administrations that are not stepping up, doing their part, well, that's very troubling. It's great to have policies in place, but they're not enforced and not addressed and taught and say, hey, look, this is something that we need to do, that something's wrong with this system. We need to go back to the well and find a solution to correct it. So I just figured I'd get it out there because it was really bothering me this weekend. And I said, I'm going to wait till the Citizens Police Review comes on and talk about this, because that way I can get whatever thoughts or feedback from other people and see how they felt. But yeah, I mean, this is all over. Even me looking for work when I came up here was the same thing. And, you know, it's all over. But I don't think you have enough time for my story. Probably have to do a documentary one day, one-on-one. But this is something that I really like to express and get out there. That's why I came on, and I'm just going to talk about it. And thank you for your time and for the real talk.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. Your contributions are always so appreciated. So I'm next simply because the queue is a little short at this moment, but Gary, if you would like to talk further, I would love to give my time to you. Or if you decide you would like more time, I think that there will be more time. I know you said you could write a book, but I think we have time for like a novella or, or perhaps like a vignette at this point. So about my personal story, unless Gary chimes in and says he'd like to speak, I moved here from Washington, D.C., which is a very racially segregated community. And it's well known for being the murder capital of the world when I was a kid, and then for being the place of a lot of gun violence. However, when I lived in DC, I believed that Black people, obviously mistakenly, were 50% of the population. And so I felt myself to be among the majority. And in that, I felt a sense of equality and power. It wasn't until I moved to Vermont, which I thought was a very progressive, wonderful small town. In so many ways it is, that I experienced racism in a way that I had never encountered it before. And the thing about Vermont is when you've got a white state, it is white supremacy by default. So Vermont has the need to act against white supremacy and be actively anti-racist, or else white supremacy is the de facto norm. There's no getting around it, because Black people make up such a small minority, and people of color, and any of the other things you want to talk about that put people at risk for policing. And there is this culture of non-belonging. I've been asked my entire life where I'm from. And where I'm from is a coded way of saying, you don't belong. How do I categorize you? And that is rampant in this town and in this community. I have received more microaggressions. As a matter of fact, before I moved here, I didn't even know what a microaggression was. I knew outright aggression. I know like a Confederate flag. And that lets me know where a person is right off the bat. I like that. I want my racism in my face. When I have my racism in small little doses that appear to be like, oh, your skin's so beautiful. Oh, your hair is so interesting. Where are you from? No, really, where are you from? So all of those things build up and tell you that you don't belong. The other thing that I found, in DC, the police don't just pull you over randomly all the time. They have bigger things to do. They have better things to do, right? They're harassing people in certain neighborhoods. They are harassing whatever marginalized community that they've decided to harass, you know? But when you're driving in your car, you don't feel like you're just gonna get pulled over for any reason. However, in Brattleboro, and in this community, I have been pulled over so many times. And for the simplest of things, and I've also noticed that I have a white husband. When he drives, he has no fear. He doesn't think to himself the cop behind him might pull him over. My heart is like palpitating. I'm watching my driving. I'm making sure I'm driving in a straight line, and all of my motions are to counterbalance what I'm afraid is going to happen if that police pulls me over. Now, more than likely, I'm just going to get a warning, or they're just going to say nothing and they're going to drive away. But it's a culture of fear. It's a culture of non-belonging. And that keeps Black people in this community and people of color in this community from feeling as if they belong here. And that is what I think this committee is working to change. So we need all of your help to figure out how to heal Brattleboro and how to make Brattleboro the place that it believes itself to be, but that it is not actually, not yet. So that's it.
Thank you, Lana. Thank you for being here and for sharing.
Thank you, Lana. Yeah, now we got some hands in the queue.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I put my hand up, but I see some other hands went up. So I definitely want to let other folks go.
Okay, so the next person will be Z, followed by Shela.
Hello. I feel like the hardest thing revolving policing that I've experienced in Brattleboro, mostly in school, is denying that there is a problem with police and that it's all fine and dandy and that the system works and it's all great. And also having my police trauma denied, as if like you can't be traumatized by police or like get nervous or scared or terrified from them, because they're here to protect us. And I feel like a lot of my peers just didn't understand that, and my relationship that I've had with police and the relationship my family has had with police. But like when I was in school, I feel like the biggest thing was the school resource officers, and they are in full uniform, full like decked out belt, like they have all the stuff on them. And we usually had 2 school resource officers at the high school every day. And there was one time where there was 3, and I never actually knew what they were there for. I still don't know what they're there for. They don't do any like community discussions. They don't really connect with any of the students, really. They're not there for any particular reason. And I feel like the biggest reason is intimidation. And I like every day they're usually outside. Like when I would walk into school, they'd be standing there like waving or like having people come into the building. And that's like the first thing you see is just like 2 to 3 police officers just like as you're walking into school, and it just feels like I'm walking into a prison. And like they don't even say anything. It's not like they're really friendly or like I know them very well, but like it's just they were just very intimidating. And I was a part of the restorative justice program at UHS, so I would facilitate meetings, and whenever students would get into like altercations and stuff, I'd help the meetings and whatever. And there was this one time one of the school resource officers came in during a restorative and sat there and basically was very intimidating and started talking in the meeting and was like, I was looking up the laws on my phone, and if you were to do this, I'm not going to do it now because I'm a good cop and whatever. But if you were to do this again or whatever, everything you did in this situation, I could arrest you right now. So don't do it again, which is completely defeats the purpose of restorative justice. It's supposed to be a safe circle and cops are not supposed to be involved. And and just with driver's ed too, they have an officer come in and basically kind of every class I was intimidated to answer questions because he would kind of force you to and like get in your face about it and be like, if you were to answer with that answer, I could issue you a ticket right now. And there was a time where I had to be left alone in the room with him and do a driver's ed simulation. And he was hovering over my shoulder the whole time, watching me drive on this like fake simulator thing, just like pointing out all these mistakes I was making and how I could have gotten a ticket if I did those things. And I was just alone with him in the room. And it was very, very uncomfortable. I had extreme anxiety the whole time. And I was like, I want to leave. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't know why I'm in here alone with you, but it was very terrible. So I think the biggest thing right now is SROs. And right now, like Youth for Change is kind of working on how to get SROs. We're starting to think about starting a campaign with getting SROs out of school because we did a conference and we learned that a lot of schools have gotten rid of them and a lot of schools are starting campaigns to get rid of them. So we're trying to work on getting them out of BUHS right now.
Thank you, Z. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Z. And you bring up a good point about the SROs. I don't think we've discussed that in our, so we will sort of talk about that further as a committee.
Sheila, I think you're next. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Emily. I'm Shela, she, her. I'm in Brattleboro, and I could also have a documentary, so I'll try to be concise, and I took a little bit of notes so I can try my best to not run over the 5 minutes, but I just wanted to paint a picture for people of my experience. Some of you know me better than others here. For those of you who don't know me, I grew up in Brattleboro. I'm not only grew up, but I'm born and raised here, and I've lived here all my life with my family, with my own family, and now I'm a grandparent. And so I just wanted to put it in perspective that I've had a long history in Brattleboro and a long history with the Brattleboro Police, specifically in many different capacities. How I remember as a child growing up first having interactions with police was around evictions in my home. Then I grew up on Canal Street. I lived there for the first 8 years of my life, and then we actually lived on Clark Street. And for those of you who currently know those neighborhoods, they weren't very different than they are today, and they were much so stigmatized as they are today, being the most diverse communities, being the most lived in and well-used communities, and had very much the same stigma and concerns that currently go in those neighborhoods. When I was on Clark Street, I actually thought the police lived on my block because the cruiser just stayed there constantly. I thought that was an actual thing. And when I was a young child living on Clark Street, I think my brother was 12 years old. It was a Sunday and we were doing Bible study in our home. And my brother is 3 years older than myself. And he got ripped out of our home by the police because of mistaken identity at the age of 12, and said that he had committed some type of crime, which clearly was not him. And that was very traumatizing for me. And I will never forget that, as I was, I believe, 9 years old at the time and didn't understand what was going on or what my brother did. Come to find out that he didn't do anything, that it was mistaken identity. And the police thought that they could just come into our home because there were so few Black boys in the community at the time that it must have been him. That went on to other issues within the community. And then that led into school, where my brother and I were racially harassed and bullied all of our duration of our whole school life. But it stemmed into my brother being really pushed into the school to prison pipeline and being literally put in a straitjacket and removed from the school and arrested when we were teenagers. as I grew up, that was just some of my experiences as a child. And then as I grew up, I constantly stopped while driving, while walking at my home. A few years ago was being profusely racially harassed by a neighbor who was intimidating me and invading in my personal space and harassing me. And when a community member finally called the police on my behalf because it was so bad, they said, "Why didn't you call sooner?" And then they followed it up with saying, "We can't do anything for you." So it led this impression of like, okay, when I really need your help, you can't help me. But then you shame me into thinking that I have a false solution in calling you. And that somehow by me calling you is going to be the resolve of my concern or issue that I have. But in actuality, 90% of the time, it's caused more harm and or not affected change in my situation at all. I continue to have those experiences with partners I might have had. And in my life, I've dated a lot of Black cis men, and they have not been from Vermont. And every single one from the entry into Vermont has met the Brattleboro police, every single one. And in ways where walking down the street on Gallery Walk, you look like the description. Driving into the first time in Vermont, talking about where's the mother lode, what's your alias, I know that you have drugs, you've just been on 91. Those are the type of experiences that I've had growing up, I've had recently, and continue to have had in my life. Concerns that I really have is around all of those things, but is around the complaint process. And my huge concerns are around accountability for the police and their immunity. I have filed numerous complaints towards the Brattleboro police on a variety of issues, both on behalf of myself as well as members of this community. I was one of the people who was original people on the CPCC, which had no teeth and no power to do anything and still does not. I have been engaged in lots of work around policing and currently sit appointed to by the Attorney General, the Racial Disparities in Criminal and Juvenile Justice System panel currently. So I am not only what I call a victim of police, but I'm also somebody who's trying to be part of the solution and has continuously been a part of that, even during my trauma and my experiences of myself and my family, my friends, and my community that I love. And so the complaint processes that I've endured is, if the complaint even goes through, what has happened is that then I go into the back room, usually with the chief or somebody superior in the jail, behind locked, closed doors, in a room by myself on film with an officer who is always a male at that time. And am said to say whatever I need to say, complaint against either them as the person, or one of their colleagues. And that is how they take complaints. So that's been my experiences of how I've had to give complaints to the police. Everything about that is intimidating. Everything about that is inequitable. Everything about that is wrong, absolutely wrong. And then not to be followed up with, to not be able to check over what was said or written about your complaint, to not be able to defer or to question what the other person, the officer, whomever said. All these things, just there's no checks and balances, there's a zero accountability. And so I want to end by just saying that some of the things that I've also experienced by police is I've experienced unwanted touch. I've experienced harassment on a variety of different levels. I've experienced lies and perjury, and I will say that firmly, in perjury in the court of law, not just on outside in the streets. I have experienced racism, blatant, adversive, and micro. I've been targeted as a person of color in this community, and so has my family numerous times. I've been assaulted. I've been bullied. I've been intimidated. Much of what Z has said, those intimidating factors of if you do this, or if you just say this, or I can do this for you, playing law, playing God, playing somebody that they are not. I've been misled, and I've been completely dismissed. And so those are just some of the things that I can offer, maybe potentially in the 5-minute time. But I'm here because I am also here because there's many youth who are on this call and for Youth for Change. And I am one of the people who works with the Root. And we have many people who are most impacted to this situation. And I am fortunate enough to be able to hold space for a lot of people who have come to me as an advocate to hold space for them with police relations. And so it's not just my story that I speak for, and I only speak for myself, but I just want you to know that there are dozens and dozens of other people that are not able to be here today that have a voice in this as well. So thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Shela. You get all the snaps, like all of them.
Thank you, Shela, for being here and for sharing.
I'm not sure if it was intentional, but Gary, would you like to share more? I wasn't sure about your blue hand.
Oh, well, I just wanted to tell on it. Yeah, definitely a lot of mine is more of a documentary. So I might not have been living up here in Brattleboro that long. I'm originally from Yonkers, New York. I got up here after 9/11, 2008. My experience with racism stems back into to the 70s. Like I said, I'm an old timer, so this is nothing new. It's nothing I haven't seen or experiences. And the thing about that, if you look it up on Google about Yonkers, Yonkers was the last city to be desegregated. The last city and what they had to go through. So a lot of that, when I see it up here, it just shakes me to my foundation to see that it's, further up, considering all the things that is said about, Vermont and all this and everything. But, no matter where you go, anywhere in this state or anywhere in this country or in the world, you're still going to have that particular racism or profiling. And it's not just with the police, it's on the job, it's in the schools, it's in the hospitals, everywhere you go. So, no matter what happens, this is something that we need to deal with on so many different levels, and an action has to be taken about it, and not just writing, sayings or logos and this and that. We need to act on that. And that's what the activists were like back in the 70s, acting on like what you guys are doing now, moving on this, making it happen. I used to speak to Bob Olson. We used to reminisce about New York, and I talked about how different, when he's familiar with it too, about how the police were in the 70s. Some were approachable, some weren't approachable. We had the Police Athletic League. I suggested that a while back, where you can integrate to get to know the officers. There were some that were pretty much giving cold shoulders and stuff. I was profiled when I came up to Keene. I got to the point, I went to the precinct. I said, you know what, why not just sit here in the precinct? That way you guys don't have to keep looking for me. And he said, what do you mean? Well, every time I go around, I get the same thing. And I know the score I've been through in the 70s. You look like this person. That's such a, oh, okay. So we know how that works. So it got to the point they stopped. So sometimes you have to go to them and bring it to them and say, listen, what is going on? Why is this happening? This type of intimidation. And as you probably know, I'm the only African-American male on any of these committees or doing any of this stuff and stepping up, even on here tonight. So I have no fear factor. I've been there. There's nothing else they can do. I ain't seen or done or whatever, what they can do. So I just speak up, speak my mind, say, look, I've been there, done that. I've seen it. And like I said, if any of you guys need help, I have no problem to talk with you. But something like this, I think, is a whole different forum about personal experiences being racially profiled. Maybe we should have something like a documentary. Maybe you put something together from different people's aspect, being disabled, sexist, religious, whatever. Maybe for like an hour, that person could just talk about their personal experience from the time they grew up until the time they came here. Like I said, this is deep rooted. This is something that needs to be unrooted, and the seed of love, passion, compassion, and harmony and peace needs to be planted, because this younger generation, as you can see, stepped up with the votes. They've had enough. They see what's going on. They're not blind or oblivious to this. And we adults need to encourage that spirit, and I'm quite sure, with a lot of the other activists, I speak to a lot of them, they know about it. They dealt with it, but I usually ask them, how was it like when you were growing up? Not just here in Brattleboro, but in New York and different places in different states, like with Lana, with Shela, and all of you. I'm sure you all have experienced some type of racism on different levels or jobs or whatever. But for me, it's just something that, it's just not acceptable, and I learned this from my grandmother, my mother. She said, there's nothing you can't do. You put your mind to it. Don't let anybody stop you from doing what you need to do. I went to Catholic school, 1st to 8th grade, 4 years all boys school, 2 years college. So it doesn't take a rocket science, a college degree to see when a person is not treating another person with respect, and not saying that they have to in return, but at least acknowledge that you're human, and that you exist as well as they do. We all share the same feelings. We're like symbiont beings. We all feel the same pain as that other person. If you don't have any passion with your compassion, then you don't have anything. You're empty. You got to get out there and just, walk the walk. That's what it comes down to, And like I said, I'd love to at some point get together with some of you guys. If we open up this spigot, just sit down in the circle, have a cup of coffee, even with the police officers too. I mean, they're going to have to, at some point, we're going to have to say, hey, look, you're here too, just like us. You're humans just like us, bottom line, because once Mr. President gets into office, changes are coming down the pipeline, and we got to be either a part of it or a victim of it. I choose to be a part of it and a solution and not a victim anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. You literally stopped talking at exactly the time the timer went off. It was pretty remarkable.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Z, your hand is still up. Are you wanting to share again? And others, please, if you are ready to share. Kelsey?
All right, well, I'll just fill this space for a little bit while hopefully other people raise their hands. I am writing out my story in full to share in written form publicly with the committee and the select board. And I'm preparing to share sort of a slice of that in a 5-minute bit Saturday night. But for now, while we're waiting for anybody at all that wants to speak, I'll just share that I am a survivor of intimate partner violence, born and raised in Brattleboro. A lot of family history, a lot of social equity and connections. And I grew up, from the privileged perspective of a white girl in Brattleboro from a very liberal family that, although my family has absolutely no experience with law enforcement, either being in trouble or needing to call for help, I operated under the impression that in the darkest of times, in an emergency, when horrible could not be worse, the police would be there and they would protect and in a respectful, safe way, with professionalism, without judgment, because that is their job. So that was the construct that I had as a privileged girl here in Brattleboro from a very liberal family. And I would say, sort of the story of being a survivor is we all have our individual circumstances. We all have our own backgrounds of how we ended up in the relationship and what it took for us to get out. But in many ways, the stories are all the same. And so for me, sort of recognizing that I was in it and needed to get out of it, it wasn't when I was ready. It was really more about being ready to do that. That scenario wasn't hard for me to sort out. What's been hard for me to sort out and why I have such a fire for speaking and sharing my story is what I experienced on the way out. And that's not just from law enforcement. It's from this liberal, Birkenstock wearing, co-op shopping, Bernie loving, green smoothie drinking community that I hail from. In most circumstances, most, not all, I would say it's unintentional stigma and discrimination that I experienced. But the harm that causes is just as painful and just as detrimental, specifically for folks, primarily women, seeking safety from domestic and sexual violence, because we're already pushing through just vast amounts of shame and self-doubt, and pushing through it anyway for our survival and quite often to protect our children. And to be met as we're trying to re-enter the community, which is what we are doing. I mean, absolutely no facet of our lives go untouched. We are rebuilding absolutely everything you can possibly comprehend. It may look different depending on the woman, right? May have more resources to keep it more of a private hell than others, but the story is the same. And to be met by our community, our employers, our neighbors, quite often family members, friends, and law enforcement with more shame is just appalling to me. Regardless of my awareness that it's quite often unintentional, we still need to work on that. We need to be willing to have these uncomfortable conversations. We need people to be willing to put their egos aside and say, I want to understand. This is so foreign to me. But yes, I've signed up for this job and I'm going to do better. I want to do better. I'm not accepting blame for others' intentional harm that they've caused. But I understand that by operating in the same way that we always have and not being willing to evolve, I'm perpetuating this issue. And to me, I don't think we're asking too much of law enforcement to be willing to evolve, right? Like I've been pretty vocal that I'm not ready to say we need to abolish the police. I still think we really need them. And I see the police in Brattleboro, they're still, I mean, I know there are female cops out there, but I have yet to engage with one. We have this agency of men signed up and ready to potentially be healthy leaders in what healthy masculinity looks like to survivors. So I have a lot more to say, but I'm hoping other hands will pop up and I'll stop talking. We got one. All right, more to come.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Wichi, would you like to share?
Sure. I think mine's going to be more of a vomit, and just treading carefully because I don't know how much I'm willing to put out there about my own experience, and it makes me very, very anxious to talk about it. But a lot of my police experience, I think with me it's a little complicated. From a young age, I was just always told, people who do drugs or sell drugs are bad, and the police are out there to catch them for you. Or there's more police in urban places because that's where more drugs are, right? And really just sort of buying into this idea for a long time. And the moment that changed, I think it sort of started opening up my eyes, is when I was assaulted by a police officer. And I'm not going to get into the details because I don't really want to see what happened publicly. But just going through years of courts trying to prove that I was assaulted. And then the police officer not going to jail, just being laid off or fired or whatever, and then being stalked by that same police person, and basically just being forced to leave when I was calling home, and then coming to Brattleboro and even since then, just hearing a lot of people's stories are speak to this. Either you've been assaulted, or you've been discriminated against, or you've been lied to, or you've been stopped without an excuse. Like all of this just repeats itself over and over and over. And I've seen it a lot since then. So when I went to what sort of started all of this for me in Brattleboro specifically is when the chief held that forum. And I went and I noted that I had that experience and, talked about, racism and the drug war and, the roots, and really tried to lay it all out of why we're here and why we're talking about this. And instead of being acknowledged for what happened to me, or, being like, thank you or any of that, the chief just then sort of like turned around and said, nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. And it's like, how can you hate the person who did this to me more than I do? And it's not even hate. It's like, it's just like not even, like not very clearly not listening. And as the forum went on and people even asked him questions, and he just like stared off into blank space and then had to be called out for not answering a question. And then he was like, oh, I'm sorry, what was the question? And just like blatantly not listening. And in all of this, I just keep thinking about the amount of power that police have. The ability to kill someone and get away with it. The ability to hide under the rug any complaint, to hide under, behind screens of things that are quote unquote confidential and cannot be, given publicly about things that happen with police officers. So it's just astounding to me that the police department does not acknowledge that this is happening, that the town of Brattleboro, really in Vermont, consistently being told that this doesn't happen here, being told that stop trying to bring the stories from not here to here. Because you can tell from this forum, it happens to everyone. And being in Vermont is not an exception. That was it. Check. Thank you.
Thank you, Ichi. Thank you for joining
you so
us
much,
and for
Ichi.
your courage.
Thank you. The last thing you said really, really struck me, thinking about, Vermont and how Vermonters like to say that it doesn't happen here. And yet Vermonters don't question themselves as to why Vermont is so white. It is not a mistake that Vermont is white. When Black people left the South from Jim Crow laws and migrated up north, Vermont would have been a wonderful place to call home and to lay down roots. And in fact, a lot of Black people tried, or at least some families tried. And if that had worked, if they had been allowed to stay, if they hadn't faced oppressive racism, if there wasn't a brook in up further in Vermont called Negro Brook that's named after the Black family, in a derogatory way that lived there, then maybe we would have more families that settled here. We'd have a more thriving, more diverse, more vibrant Vermont, but we don't. And it is by design, and it is a fact at this exact moment. So thank you so much for bringing that up and for speaking and for sharing. And I really hope that we can connect with you additionally after this.
Sure. I just, if it's okay, I just wanted to add some things that I remembered. I think also one thing that stuck out to me in that forum is that when the chief of police was asked to put his gun down for the safety of the people, his response was, the gun is a tool of my trade, or something along those lines. And yes, police officers are trained in violence. They're trained to stop violence with violence. So when the question is asked, what are they trained to respond to? You can insert their tool of trade is a gun, which is used to kill or maim, and therefore their trade is to use violence in response, and in response to what? And you lay out all the responsibilities that we've given to police officers. So and especially when we talk about what masculinity has been in our society, like that is so emblematic. It's such an epitome of what police officers have come to be. And I think a very momentous change that I would want to see, the ability for cops to, one, not be trained in violent responses, and two, the ability to put down your gun. Can you put down your gun for the sake of your community? Both metaphorically and literally. Thank you.
Thank you, Ichi.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to add one more thing. I'm sorry, because if there's no one else that wants to speak, I do have a relevant point. In addition to the guns being a tool of their trade, and who are they using those weapons against? I mean, it's a really good idea to think about the history of policing in this country and the genesis of the creation of the police force, which was to catch runaway fugitive slaves and to police the native population. So if you have something, there's a really great quote that I believe it's Audre Lorde, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And that is something that we really have to put into our thought process when we think about policing in this country. Is how do we change something that began under slavery, that began to police Black and brown bodies? So of course, that is what it's doing to this very day, because that is what it was designed to do. If the only tool is a hammer, then everything is a nail.
Snaps to that. Absolutely. Thank you, Lana. Thank you. And Krista, would you like to share?
I will. I'm sorry, I'm not. I'm in the midst of parenting and here, so I apologize if I'm not as cohesive in my thoughts, but feel like I really wanted to reach out and share some of my concerns as a parent. And I apologize if I get teary talking about this, but I'm a parent of a child with a developmental disability who also has a lot of emotional, mental health challenges. And we've already had one instance where, I had to leave a situation in town and I forgot to put my lights on in my car and got pulled over by a police officer. And I just think about some of the embarrassment and shame that I feel and worry, like, if, when as a parent, if you need help and you don't have somebody to help out in a crisis, there's not really a place to turn to. And so I feel so worried. My son is getting older, he's getting bigger. In the culture in our schools is that we still use seclusion rooms and we put kids who are like him. He was suspended from school. I mean, he's got Down syndrome. He was suspended from school when he was 10 years old for being unsafe because he was not understood. For me, I just want to advocate just for people who have disabilities. The fear I have, I mean, just 2 weeks ago, I was in town and he wasn't able to move and was not being safe. And I thought, I have nobody to call. And I don't think that any parent or person should feel in our community feel like they're not really sure where to go for help, where they're not going to, that it's going to escalate. Like, I'm worried that that would escalate his situation or make him feel safe. I mean, if a police officer showed up with a gun, he could run into the street. You know what I mean? Like, it's a huge fear of mine. So for me, I'm speaking as a parent of a child with a disability who I worry about him being hurt. I worry about, I fear for how he's judged. I fear for how his behavior will be perceived when he's not understood. So thank you. That's all I wanted to share.
Thank you so much for sharing and for being in this space with us.
Thank you, Krista.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I just want to also add, like, I know it's so courageous and brave and vulnerable to share, and so all the emotions are welcome. Thank you for sharing and for your bravery. And Jillian,
I'm gonna share again that at the end we're gonna talk about other ways to share with us that are not in front of 50 people and recorded for posterity. So if you're feeling like a burning desire to share your thoughts, feelings, opinions, experiences also, and you don't want to do it here, that's valid. We'll talk later about how to make that space for you. But thank you to everyone who's also able to do that in public, because it helps us build community to talk about this stuff together and build a movement.
thank you. Jillian, would you like to share?
Thank you. So I didn't grow up in Brattleboro, but I did grow up nearby, and I've worked in Brattleboro, and I would come there as a child as well. From the very beginning of my time in Vermont, I was taught that I was different and that I didn't really belong. As a toddler, I was the only person of color in my preschool class. I was raised by a white couple who liked to be really active in the community and abused me emotionally and physically behind closed doors. Not only was my identity, culture, language, and even connections to my biological family stolen from me, but they used the police to instill fear into me and keep me under their complete control. My own adoptive mother called the police on me for some of the most mundane and ridiculous scenarios, and I'm not going to share them all right now. However, when I chose to escape the abuse and leave my childhood home at 18 years of age, they did call the police on me then, when I was attempting to leave with more than the one trash bag of clothes that they were allotting me. But honestly, during those years, the police were the least of my concern. Really, it was more the various forms of racism from the community members that I experienced and was constantly told didn't exist from the endless sea of white people who obviously knew better than me about racism. No matter how they tried to convince me that their racial slurs and targeting were compliments, I never trusted them, and with good reason. Those same people are the ones I've watched grow more emboldened in the recent years. They're also the ones who were once my peers. They were the children of school teachers and other prominent community members, and now they are becoming those who hold positions of power and influence themselves, all while doubling down on their ignorance, hatred, and bigotry. But their white friends still feel safe. I only started to feel safe in Vermont when I came into community of BIPOC through the root. But it shouldn't take being in BIPOC-only spaces for BIPOC to feel safe in Vermont. I'm a Latina, and last year I brought a Latina friend of mine into Brattleboro for the first time ever, and we were followed by a store associate downtown, so blatantly being profiled. What a shameful way to introduce someone to Brattleboro. As a Latina, I've come to know that while I will be profiled, I will be targeted, I will be assaulted, as I have been before, I will always have white people telling me that my experiences aren't real because they aren't real to them. We have to do better for every single member who has spoken up today, for those who haven't been here to speak up, for those who have been harmed throughout their lives, for those who fear bringing children into this world and into this community. We have to do better so that this doesn't continue to be the legacy of Brattleboro. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Jillian.
Thank you, Jillian. And shout out to the Root for being a space for a lot of us, myself included.
I want to make space for folks who haven't shared yet to share, if anybody has more to share. And this can include people who want to share their own experience or their visions, again, for a safer community. And I think we're going to wrap up that portion of our meeting at 7:45 or 7:50 so that we can share with you some other ways to participate and what else we're up to. So please feel free, if you have not spoken yet, to share with us things. And if nobody will, and some folks who have already spoken want to speak again, that's fine.
I just want to acknowledge that these stories have been really hard to hear, for us, even as we know that they exist. I can personally feel it in my body, your stories, and I want to acknowledge that.
Thank you for bringing that in, Lana. We have a question in the chat about if someone can share something that didn't happen to them personally. And what we've been saying about that so far is that you can share your own experience, including an experience of observation, as long as you're really careful not to out anybody's identity, knowing that this is a really small community. So if you share a story that might be identifiable, people still might know who that is. So if you want to share your own observations, I think that's really fine, but maybe whoever we're talking about, we really just want to extra protect not out people. So I trust that you can do that. Perhaps Anna can go next, and then the folks who've already shared who also have their hands raised can go after that if no one else wants to.
Okay,
Anna, take it away.
Thank you, Shay. Hi, everyone. And I just want to thank everyone that has spoken. I think I'm just echoing what people have said, but it's really brave. I have been in Brattleboro for a long time, and I just thought that this information would be pertinent to the discussion. Is that I had an experience a couple of years ago on the street that I live on, in which a neighbor had let me know that the police had been around and they had been kind of hanging around this house that had been abandoned. And so I went, and apparently I heard that they had kicked people out that were sleeping behind this abandoned house. And so I walked around the house, and the police were no longer there, but this is on my street. And so I walked around, and what I saw were 2 tents, and the rods of the tents had been taken by the police. And the police business card was thrown on the ground, and it said, if you want your rods back, you can contact us. And so I took photos of it, and I wrote a letter to Chief Fitzgerald, and I contacted Josh Davis, as many of you may know him as executive director of Groundworks. And I was incredibly angry because here you have police officers taking one of the only things that these people maybe own for shelter. And they may or may, who knows, been sleeping behind that house, the safe place to sleep, not bothering anyone on the street. And I came to find out, I did hear a response from police or Fitzgerald, but I came to find out that this was a common practice of police that also included slashing tents of people who sleep in tents and don't have anywhere else to sleep. Another thing I just want to add to that, because it is tied, is that I'm part of Indigo Radio on WVW. And I think it was last summer or the summer before, I interviewed a number of people that live on the streets. And time after time, they told me of the harassment of police, even police looking for them at night to kick them out of spaces to sleep. So I just wanted to share that as knowledge of what I've seen in the town that is just not okay. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Anna.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah. Gary, I know your hand was up first. I'm wondering if it's okay with you if we go to Z, since you've shared a couple of times. We've only heard from Z once. Love to hear more too. Z, would you like to share more?
Yeah. I just kind of wanted to echo off of like the houselessness factor. I go on a lot of night walks, and I've seen police kind of like they put their searchlights facing towards the graveyard and will go like 2 miles per hour, just like looking for homeless people probably sleeping. And I've seen them just abuse their power a lot, like sitting in front of houses like in my neighborhood too, and just like speeding intensely. They are always speeding. I've seen them go like 50 in a 25, and like they're just always rushing around the neighborhood. But I also just wanted to share another story. I recently got a car over the summer, and I was in the car with my two friends who are also brown, and we were getting off exit 1 heading towards Guilford, and my clutch blew. And there happened to be a cop parked on the other side, like probably checking for speeding and whatever. And luckily, this officer was fairly helpful, was understanding, helped us get out of the road, pushed my car up on the grass median, helped us get in contact with AAA, and was understanding and great, didn't check any of my information, wasn't asking for anything, was just like really helpful and productive. And then he was like, okay, here's my card, I'll come back and check on you guys later. And so we were just sitting in the car waiting for AAA, and I was thrilled that that was a positive experience. And then I got really scared when the state trooper came up and noticed us and was on the other side of the road. We were just sitting on the grass median, like right off the exit. And he stops and he's just like, roll down your window, like signaling to me. And I was like, oh my God. And so I rolled down my window and he's like, what's going on here? And just like immediately kind of starts to like interrogate me about the situation. And I'm like, oh, like we're just waiting for AAA, like an officer already came, like we're all set, like thanks. And he was just like, what AAA, like what AAA agency, like who's coming from AAA, like what's going on with the AAA, like who is it? And I'm like, I literally don't know, like I never had to call AAA before, I've never had a car before, it's my mom's AAA, I don't know. And he was like, okay, that seems really weird, like what officer did you talk to, like which officer was it, like what officer did you talk to? And I was like, thank God or something that he gave me his card, because I don't know what he would have done if I was like, I don't remember. He most likely would have gotten out of the car and like continued to interrogate me and ask me questions. But I'm glad I got his card. And I was like, this officer came and he was like, okay, just stay in the car and like, don't do anything and like, just wait for AAA. And I'm like, thank you. That's what I was already doing. That's what we all were already doing. That was really unnecessary interaction. You could have kept driving after I told you we were all set and that an officer already came and we're waiting for AAA. But thank you. Goodbye. So yeah, I just wanted to share that story.
Thank you, Z, and for the humor at the end.
Thank you, Z, for sharing your story.
Thanks, Z.
I'm glad you're here. Shela.
Thanks. I often when I talk about concerns, like to talk about solutions as well and talk about affirming. And so I don't have very many things to affirm in this category, but I will say that I can pull something out. And what I will say is like part of the conversation is what we would like to see, what makes community safe. And I can only think of 2 incidences off the top of my head in my whole life with police that I felt was good or okay. And that was when I got my car in Brattleboro and an officer, I locked myself out of my car while at the car wash. And they came and jimmied the car and unlocked me for free. And I thought that what a great use of resources. What a great use of helping community. What a great use of not having me stuck in this bay with all this line behind me who wants to wash a car and just come and do something so simple and easy. Like it just felt so good. And we laughed about it. And I thought that was great. Another incident that I had much more recently, which happened maybe about 6 months, 9 months ago. Unfortunately, somebody in my neighborhood was ODing and I happened to find them. And fortunately, we carry Narcan on us, and a neighbor and I were able to get Narcan, and I was able to administer Narcan on this person. But what was so great was when the police did arrive, because ambulance, police, everybody that what I did like was that they, even though it was very sort of loud and abrasive, I did feel as though that person still had some agency. I did feel as though that they were clearly in the process of being trained of how to interact with what many people call the opiate epidemic, or people who have substance use disorders. And I really appreciated and could see the ambulance working with the police and the police working with me, because I felt this person in my arms who was just coming to two from ODing. And so I will say that the things I want to see is more of that. I want to see more of community helping community, more of us saving each other's lives, more of us helping each other out, more of that mutual aid, more of humanness, more of being humans and not hiding behind immunity, not hiding behind a badge, not hiding behind a gun, not hiding behind I live in the next town over. But I really would like to see us actually being human beings and caring for each other and our lives. And those are the only two instances, but I think they're pretty valid that I can account for in my experiences with the police.
Thank you, Sheila, for sharing your vision. Yes, thank you.
Let's have Rebecca L. speak next.
I want to share a story with all of you. So I have 4 girls. And I mentioned my husband before. We both believe strongly in open communication. And if you recall what happened to George Floyd and then all the protests, etc. Now, my kids are 11, 8, 6, and 4. And I explained to them directly what had happened. And my second girl, who's 8, said to her dad, "I don't want you to die," which made us stop in our tracks. Because you did mention before, Vermont is such a white state, and we're always in search for resources about biracial children and mixed race kids, etc., children of color. You know, where are safe places for them, where they could share their experiences or have a group of peers who they feel the same and not always feel targeted or like they're the only one. We don't want them to be in fear of police or feel singled out. And they've seen what my husband's gone through and fear that he's experienced. So this has been very impactful for us. I don't want my girls to be afraid through their lives and in Brattleboro. I want something to be there for children of color, for mixed race children, etc. Thank you.
And Rebecca, I want to let you know that the route is here for you. And if you need a person of color to help, bring a child or for the BIPOC things, then, there's always someone who's willing to step up and do that.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing.
Thank you.
The story.
All right, I think Kelsey's going to be next.
Well, I'll let Gary go ahead again, because I plan on sharing more at a later time.
Okay, well, I'll keep it quick, simple, and brief. About, I guess, what we were talking about with Chief Fitzgerald. I guess we all need to remind ourselves, remember that a lot of the police officers have ex-military backgrounds. So I think it stems from that also being a military person, that a lot of them don't relinquish their firearms right away, because this is something that was taught in the military when they were there. So that being incorporated, what they're being trained with the police force, is another thing that they are working with and addressing. I guess that safety issue, because when you're fighting in a war, you just don't put your rifle down because the enemy's right there. So that's pretty much, I guess, the mentality that, you know, wow, the enemy's out there, and a lot of them come into play with that, you know. So I don't know if it's a flashback. I don't know what you want to call it, but also I have to agree with Shela. There were some positive incidences that happened in Brattleboro, like the one that was on Putney Road with that gentleman. They pretty much de-escalated him when he was having an episode in the summer. I've come across a few of the officers that were approachable. You could talk with them. There are some new ones that, you know, walk down the street, and sometimes, you know, they have this, seems like this authority, they hold on to the thing. That's probably the biggest thing that gets me when they're walking down with that. I mean, just relax, you know, pretty much just be loose. You know, people are more approachable when you are more acceptable and susceptible to be approached to and talked with, and not walking down with this or holding on to your, like you're in the wild, wild west. I think maybe that type of lesson or something could be taught in the police force, and maybe walking with people of color down the street or whatever, whoever, letting them, you know, just walk with them and say, hey, let's have a, you know, when this thing lifts, this doesn't feel that comfort zone. And a lot of my guests are in that. And I always say hi to them, but there's never really a dialogue or conversation. It's more like, hey, how you doing? Great. Okay. And that's it. But I seem to have more conversation with the meter person or the fire department versus most of the police force. I know a lot of them. I've spoken with them. I've dealt with them. And, you know, I guess breaking down that veil, you know, I mean, you have it all over. There are some that you can talk with that are approachable, and there's others that, you know, they carry whatever stigma or whatever they brought over with it. So a lot of them talked about in the past about having some type of psychological evaluation or whatever. Who knows what trauma they've been through. So they're humans like us, but just trying to yourselves as an individual approaching these police officers to speak with them. I think if we can approach them as well too, and with, you know, the leaf of peace or the flower of peace, and say, listen, I'm here to talk with you and just see how your day is and how you're doing. I think we'll be able to break down that wall. And I think the comfort zone will be more established with it. But until then, you know, it deals with training and a lot of other things. But I think once a lot of these people in ages, even people like us, walking with them or talking on Flat Street, the comfort will be there, because then they get to know you in a different light. Because it seems like even when you call, like back in the days, I don't know if you guys are from New York, you call a police officer in the hood, guess what? Even an ambulance, good luck. You know, even up here, I ordered some food. Where you live? Canal Street. Oh, no, we don't deliver there. Oh, okay. So there's that demographic stereotype too. So there's a lot going across the board. So we do have a lot of work, and I believe things will happen in the time, but hopefully in this generation, but definitely the next. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for your voice, Gary.
Also, I want to read out from the chat that Maya shared. Shout out to the Uniformed Services Program at the retreat that treats people's trauma from serving and challenges the culture of silence. And then also, we don't know the future of that program and the retreats, non-inpatient programs being cut right now. So thanks for sharing that, Maya.
Hi, this is Drift. Since I work at the retreat, I can just comment on that.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, that program was shut down, I think, in April or May, and hasn't come back yet, unfortunately.
There's a new program starting up. I wish I remember the name of it, but I actually work with a woman involved with it. But it's starting up. It's sort of very similar to the work that was going on at the retreat, but also different facets to it. And I think they're located in Bellows Falls. So anyway, I don't have the specific details. I wish I did. But there is something else coming together, which is good at this time.
Thank you for that. We have just a few more minutes of sharing. We have the hand up of one of our brilliant committee members who has already shared but has much more to share potentially, who is Kelsey. And if anyone else who hasn't shared wants to speak, we have about 7 more minutes of sharing left in this portion, and then I'm going to share with you just a few things about what else we're up to, how else you can plug in, what is going on in this movement generally, and how to get a hold of us. So if anyone else needs to share a burning thing who hasn't shared, that's great. And otherwise, Kelsey will take it away. Going once.
I'm going to keep an eye on for hands and just stop talking as soon as someone pops up, and keep it brief anyway. I really just wanted to piggyback on some things that other folks were saying, and I will go into more detail later on down the road, but I have had some really positive experiences with law enforcement, and I'll talk about that more later. But what I did want to bring up is that sometimes there is the issue of our perception of what would make sense within the system and protocol, and it like our critique of how it's happening or not happening, but we don't have the full picture of the system that they have to operate within. And so I have an example. A few weeks ago, my 3-year-old got a hold of my cell phone while I was doing the dishes and called that emergency button on my cell phone that you can get to without putting in your password. You know, that emergency button. And so I quickly noticed that dispatch was like trying to talk to my 3-year-old, and he was looking shocked, like, wow, the phone's talking at me. So I grabbed it and said, oh, we're so fine here. I'm so sorry. This is a toddler 911 call, and, answered the questions. Sorry to bother you. We're okay. And they said, okay, have a good night. And about 45 minutes later, 2 state troopers showed up. This is Sunday evening in COVID. I'm in my bathrobe, like not looking my best, definitely not wanting officers to come into my house. And so I was a little bit like, I told you I was fine. I mean, I was thinking that. And they went through the whole scenario, and I was still, I answered all the questions again. Here's the toddler. It was him, he's super excited that there are 2 uniformed guys at our door. And then after they left, answered all the questions, they were satisfied, everything was okay. I realized, like for a moment, I had the fleeting thought, like that was a waste of their time. I told them I was fine. And then I ran out there to catch them and thank them, because I realized I have a relief from abuse order. And I know they don't see that in their system because I've looked into that. But if my child called 911, or if I called 911 and then dispatch answered and we say we're fine, I really need the police to show up anyway. And it's really easy to make the assumption that, well, that was a waste to send 2 troopers out. It's a big spectacle on my one-way street. Like, what's going on at that house? I've had a lot of police come to my house, and it's never something I feel happy about my neighbors seeing. So, but really, I ran out and just wanted to thank them and say, I'm so glad that you do this. I'm sorry that I wasted your time, and I apologize you had to come out here during COVID. But I'm glad that that is part of your response. Do I have some critiques about their body language and facial expression and like tone of voice when they were talking to me? Yeah, but believe me, I need them to come, even if I say we're fine over the phone. So I hope I'm being clear on that. And nobody else is raising their hand.
Kelsey, I wanted to thank you for sharing that. And I also want to mention, I want to imagine just for a moment that your son wasn't a 3-year-old white boy, and that you weren't who you are, and that your son was a 12-year-old Tamar Rice, or a Trayvon Martin, or a man who had mental illnesses and happened to be a young Black boy or a Black man who had called the police. And that approach would have looked very different. Not only that, but the person receiving the police sort of gruff treatment would have responded differently. And those situations escalate. And it's so great that it worked out well for you. But the problem is that it doesn't for everyone. That response isn't the same across the board, even if the phone call elicits them coming across the board. And that's what we really need to work out. And it's not individual police officers. There's so many great individual police officers. We all have cousins, uncles, fathers, but it's the system of policing, And so I'm happy that worked out, and your son's adorable.
Thank you for sharing that, Kelsey.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience, Kelsey.
We have
Tara.
one hand.
Tara.
And we're going to close out. This is going to be our last public comment, and then we need to share with you some new information. But Tara, you can share. You there, Tara?
Sorry about that. I was muted. I'm Tara O'Brien, resident of Brattleboro and also a employee at the Root. Thank you, Lana, for bringing it back to the topic of the systemic problem. You know, we can improve our police department, you know, and have good cops, but ultimately it is a system that really is a huge barrier and influence and impact on people of color in this community. People may have wonderful interactions with the police, maybe friends with people on the police force. However, people of color still have to have that conversation about the dangers that with their children, about the dangers that they potentially face with police. May not be police here in this town, but it is with police, because that's a reality. So I really think it's important to bring it back to the system and remember that, like Rebecca had said, the impact of the visuals that we see on the media, that impact is huge on our children. Huge. You know, so even if the people are not experiencing it directly, that has an influence, subconsciously, of what police mean. So, I love what my sister Shela says about, creative solutions. You know, I hope this committee looks at, alternatives to when police are dispatched to calls. Especially if it is a household of persons of color, because that has such an impact. I have a personal story I'll share on Saturday. I have to ask my daughter if I have permission to share, because it involves her. But again, I really appreciate Lana bringing it back to the system, and any recommendations that this committee will bring to looking at, how can we look at the systems in total, and who's dispatched, what alternatives we have to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara, for your insights and for bringing it back around as well. Thank you for your voice.
Thanks. My computers are like talking to themselves. I want to thank everyone for sharing, and I want to share some information about how to get a hold of us in just a minute. I have to turn off an echo that's happening, so just 1 second. Right, I'm back.
May I take this brief moment before you do that to just remind folks to either connect with the part of their body or the item in the room that was a sort of moment of grounding that was available to you in the beginning, and if you want to reconnect with that. Yes, and also my gratitude to you all for sharing, being here, witnessing.
Thanks, Emily. So in the chat, I've shared a mother load of resources for you all. There is a Facebook page for this committee's work for this project. There's a link to the town website where you can find agendas for our upcoming meetings, minutes from our last meetings, the proposal that we submitted to the town that was approved, that got us here in the first place. A link to our open mic next Saturday. It's going to be a similar structure to this. It's going to be an open public meeting, but my assumption is that more of the shares will be potentially more creative. People can share their stories just as they did here, but there's also going to be space there for song, visual art, poetry, spoken word, etc. Particularly visions for what we think would make our community safer or safe for everyone. I'm going to share some music. Vulnerable moment, but it's going to be great. And that's next Saturday. that is related to that somatic grounding practice we did at the beginning. It's important for us to share in many ways, right? There are people who share beautiful things in their through their hands or movement of their body or their voice. So that's going to be next Saturday. And also just to give you all an understanding of how else you can participate in what we're doing. We are hosting that public session. We are hosting listening sessions with specific groups of people. There's going to be an LGBTQ plus listening session this week, co-hosted by Out in the Open. You can find more info about that on our Facebook page shortly. There's going to be listening sessions with all kinds of different folks. If you are part of a community that especially is heavily policed and you want to co-host a listening session as well, we're open to that. So you can email us. My email, Emily and I share an email for this project that's in the chat. Also, there's an anonymous survey that's linked in the chat that anyone in the community can fill out. We have over 50 people who filled that out so far, which is thrilling to me. There'll be a lot of data to wade through, but that's our job. There's also a survey for anyone who works in community support organizations to fill out about what role does your organization hold in community safety. And I want to keep that really broad. If you work at, I've heard so many people mention the route tonight, right? They're not part of the flow chart of who's called from dispatch, but they're providing community safety to some people. So if you work in any way that could be construed as community safety, feel free to, or community support, feel free to fill out that organizational survey as well if you'd like. You can do that anonymously or you can name it. But in any way other than a public forum, your information is going to be shared with us, and whoever takes it in is not going to share your identity even with the rest of the committee or anyone. There's going to be listening sessions or surveys where we don't know who the person is who shares their experience with us, and that's great. That's fine. We want to make sure that people feel safe to be able to share with us. And I also want to name that informed consent is really important in terms of sharing. And trust is really important in terms of sharing. And as we've heard tonight, there are plenty of reasons for people not to trust that sharing their experiences and their thoughts and their beliefs will be safe. We can do what we can do to keep that as safe as possible. And that includes being respectful and reverent of what you've been through. And it includes making it so that our systems on the computer are as safe as possible and as anonymous as possible. And there's also risk associated with sharing, and we acknowledge that, and nobody should feel forced to participate. But the benefit of participating is that this committee is going to make recommendations to the select board at the end of this calendar year about policing and community safety systems based on not only what you all are sharing, but also a very in-depth review of the Brattleboro Police Department policies and procedures and statistics, and also an analysis of who does get called when something happens. We're talking to all kinds of nonprofits and social services. We're looking at the town budget. We're doing a really in-depth analysis. Largely Emily and I are holding a lot of those pieces, but also some committee members. And we're going to be putting forth a report that hopefully reflects what you all are sharing with us and what you all want to see in this community. For some short-term changes, like short-term budget recommendations or policy changes, and also what work needs to continue. One of my favorite thinkers about the prison industrial complex, Mariam Kaba, says that we have to work with the urgency of the moment and the patience of 1,000 lifetimes. This is a long arc of work. And this is just one tiny little piece of it that's moving very quickly. And so if you want to participate in this piece, do so and reach out to us, and we will be happy to hear from you. And it's just one little tiny piece of the larger movement work that needs to happen. The last thing I want to say about that is that there are other projects happening in the community that we are not leading that are relevant and that are also addressing the ways that these systems impact people. I'm thinking about Families United, which is a program of the Root that is working with organizing people who have been impacted by DCF. There is work happening around school resource officers and schools, right? There's all kinds of work that's happening in the community. And I'm hoping that if you care about this project, we can also be connecting to the work that everybody's doing. So I'm grateful for you all being here. If anyone else from the committee has anything to share before we close out, maybe Emily does.
I'd just like to read. Thank you so much, Shela, for being so articulate and clear about all of this. And thank you so much to the committee for holding this space tonight. Y'all are awesome. And thank you so much to the community for showing up. And I just want to read from the chat. Shela is posting that Families United with the Root is going to have a listening session this Wednesday from 5:30 to 7 for families who have been impacted by DCF and the police. So you can check out the Root Social Justice page for more information about their programs and also about this listening session. Yeah. Thank you all so much. Shay, I think you put our email address as well. And we're happy to have phone calls, video sessions, one-on-one, listening sessions, and the anonymous tool. So whatever works for you.
Someone asked who that phone number is to. It's a Google Voice phone number so that Emily and I don't have to give out our personal numbers to every single person on the planet. And it goes to me. And it's often leave a voicemail and I call you back type situation on the phone call, though I can answer it as well. But the email we're checking all the time, really regularly, not in the middle of the night, please, but really we're on top of it. And if you reach out through there or Facebook or any other way, we can hear your story. We can send you links. We can help your organization plug in. We can set up a listening session with you. We're trying to do that mostly by very early December so that we can spend December making this report and making these recommendations really strong. Thank you all so much for sharing vulnerably. I hope that you can take care of yourself and your body and your nervous system as you continue with your evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Meeting adjourned.
Yes.